The UK government's disingenuous presentation of Uganda's recent presidential election undermines its foreign policy objective to strengthen democratic institutions, human rights, free media, and effective governance, and illustrates how the UK is privileging strategic interests in East Africa over commitments to the pillars of liberal democracy globally. In a January 16th statement by the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Minister for Africa James Duddridge stated, the UK government welcomes the relatively calm passing of the elections in Uganda and notes the re-election of His Excellency Yoweri Museveni as president. However, this assessment of the campaign diminishes how violent and repressive the 2021 presidential election campaign was for the citizens of Uganda, opposition candidates and external observers. The UK failed to take seriously concerns of the election's integrity in relation to fraud and the systematic use of force and intimidation by the regime. Yoweri Museveni, with the support of his national resistance movement, has ruled Uganda's presidency since 1986. Whilst democratic elections have taken place in the country since 1996, after the country ratified a liberal constitution in 1995, Uganda has seen significant democratic backsliding. Uganda's democracy and democratic institutions have experienced gradual decay as a result of the systematic undermining by the regime's legislative and executive actions over the previous decades. Museveni, for a time, has wielded well-worn tactics to suppress its political opposition and cement his position as the country's leader. This includes partisan law enforcement, successive laws to suppress civic actors from congregating, undermining the free press, deploying lethal force against dissenters, and the ratification of a liberal constitutional amendment. However, the scale of the oppression and violence orchestrated by the regime during Uganda's most recent election, where the MP and musical celebrity Robert Kyagulanyi, known as Bobby Wine, challenged Museveni's run at a sixth term, was unprecedented. Despite concerns about the election's integrity, on the 15th of January, Museveni claimed victory amidst election violence and allegations of fraud, returning with 59% of the votes from a turnout of 57%. The campaign and the oppression of Wine. On the 6th of November, Wine launched his campaign. By the 18th of November, he had been arrested for allegedly violating COVID-19 protocols. His arrest was met by widespread demonstration around the country. The regime has retaliated with violence, resulting in 100 deaths and more than 500 injured. The figures disputed by the regime, as they only recognise 54 people being killed. On the 26th of December, campaign across all parts of the country was halted, with the government arguing that this was to prevent the spread of COVID-19. On the 27th of November, Wine's bodyguard was killed after being run over by a military police truck, and on the 30th of December, police broke up a rally hosted by Wine, using tear gas and put him under house arrest in Kampala. Wine once again was placed under house arrest on the 15th of January, shortly after casting his vote for the president. The military surrounded his house and did not let anyone in or out, despite Wine claiming he had no access to food. Reflecting on the campaign, Wine has called it crazy, like a war on a battlefield. Furthermore, the repression has not stopped post-election, as Wine and his wife, Barbara, remained under house arrest de facto until the 26th of January. By having a joint security force blocking access to Mr. Wine's home for 12 days, the regime undermined his ability to challenge effectively the election result in those crucial few days after the results were published. Wine wasn't the only opposition force victim to the regime's suppression. Other actors, foreign and domestic, fell victim to Museveni's anti-democratic tactics. For example, the Forum for Democratic Change's presidential candidate, Patrick Amuriat Aboy, was also denied access of several radio stations, this undermining candidates' democratic rights to have access to government media. Also, many external international journalists and international staff of foreign democratic organisations were barred from the country or deported as the Museveni government sought to reduce scrutiny of the campaign. In addition, on the 14th of January, the Ugandan Communications Commission, the country's broadcasting and telecommunication regulator, ordered providers to suspend internet services until further notice. The United States and European Union cancelled its observation of Uganda's presidential election because most of its accreditation requests were denied by the regime. Thus, the West forewarned that the election's results would suffer credibility. Facetiously, a regime spokesman stated that he did not remember when Uganda had last sent monitors to the United States. However, it is important to appreciate that the regime refused to recognise local civic election groups, such as the National Election Watch Uganda, a group of 68 Ugandan civil society groups to work as a domestic election observation initiative, as instead, the Electoral Commission chose to have the initiative outlawed. Now we come to the silence of the UK. Whilst a panel of UN experts iterated that they were gravely concerned about the election-related violence, the excessive use of force by security personnel, as well as the increasing crackdown on peaceful protests, and NGOs like Amnesty International stated that COVID-19 regulations were being weaponized as a pretext for political repression, the UK government has been timid in its response to Museveni's regime's use of violence pre-election, its use of intimidation on election day, and its post-election decision to keep Mr. Wine and his wife under house arrest for nearly 2 weeks. The UK might be keeping its head down because they are wary about what a change of power might mean for the region. Uganda is a Western ally, prosperous oil producer, and is considered a stabilising force in East Africa, where war has plagued some neighbours. It contributes the biggest contingent of an African Union force fighting Islamic insurgents in Somalia, where the UK has a significant security interest. The UK for many years has provided the current regime with training and equipment, thus it is disconcerting that this training, whilst being used to fight Islamist extremism, may also be being utilised to suppress Ugandans and citizens. Downplaying Ugandans' corruption and democratic backsliding has been the default position for many Western powers since the country's independence in 1962. This predominantly due to the country's regional importance during the Cold War and contemporarily as a stable state. In addition, West allies are also keen to keep the regime out of the hands of Russia and China. Nevertheless, in recent years, some Western allies like the EU and the US are slowly changing their strategic relations with Uganda, whereas it appears the UK is much slower to alter its relationship with Museveni. In particular, the USA has undergone a change in tone recently. Whilst the US remains Ugandan's most important donor, with total budget assistance exceeding $970 million per year, both the American Embassy in Uganda and the US Assistant Secretary of African Affairs have made it clear recently there will be consequences for those who are continuing to undermine democracy, which could make Museveni's regime wary of continuing to flaunt democratic norms. In contrast, the UK's current relationship with Uganda is far too presumptuous. Whilst the Foreign Office talks about concerns relating to the electoral process in Uganda and has talked about the need for said concerns to be raised, investigated and resolved in a peaceful, legal and constitutional manner, the UK government has failed to outright condemn the often violent actions of Museveni's government. In conclusion, UK foreign policy towards Uganda currently follows a path of least resistance. Whilst this may be more politically and strategically convenient in the short term, in the long term, it could prove damaging to the UK's international image. As Professor Nicholas Cheeseman from the University of Birmingham has stated, if you're going to support democracy around the world, Uganda is a pretty easy test case. This is not China or Saudi Arabia, a major economic power with influence at the United Nations and beyond. If you're going to pull your punches on Uganda, you're going to pull your punches on most countries out there. The statement made by the UK's Minister for Africa highlights consistent inconsistencies at the very heart of current UK post-Cold War policy, which are undermining the UK's reputation as a force for anything in the world.